Okay.
And then we've been changing the agenda up, so we posted it. But I'd entertain a motion to approve the agenda for this meeting and the minutes from our last meeting.
Motion to approve.
Second?
I second.
Okay. And then Miss Amy will probably join us in a minute, so we'll just skip over our treasurer's report.
I'm here.
There she is.
Yeah, I'm here.
What do you got for us, woman?
So I just need everybody's receipts from bilingual so I can get everything together.
Okay.
I need to do some reimbursements. I think I got Mark's. I don't know who paid for dinner the night before.
That's on a card.
Okay, good.
And
then I need yeah, has anyone seen a speaker invoice yet?
No.
Okay.
And they were told to send them to you, except for if you'd like the speakers to send them to Jean, Jean's offered to do that. But it's site by site for speaker fees.
Either way, I just need to know how. I'm at the
okay,
Cross
we'll
Timbers event. I can ask. Yeah, just tell me how, or I can ask Gene. He's right across the room.
Okay, well, we'll get down to that under bilingual.
Okay, perfect. I'm gonna have to hop off because I'm at this. I just wanted to make sure I got everybody's stuff, and I don't know how Encore was paying.
One thing I wanted to do is Dustin has asked for $850. They paid him that in San Antonio.
I saw that.
And so in addition, I think that we should pay Eduardo and Layla instead of $750, $1,000. And between that $250 increase and the $100 for Dustin, we made that in the raffle.
Okay.
Just think about it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's my call.
No, nothing's your fault.
No, my call. Just let me know what y'all want.
Okay.
Y'all want to do. I mean, if he's just invoicing $750, I don't know why we pay him more, but
because that was what we paid him last year, and then he brought us along.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm fine either way.
Okay.
Thank you, ma'am. We had good attendance. We had good sponsorship.
One other thing that we're going to cover in a little while is we had the board retreat scheduled for the 13th. That's also the last day of the free certified arborist training is the test. So we know Preston and Blake and Christopher Rasmussen will all be there. I was going to propose that we change to the 27th of March for a board retreat. Okay, I'll talk to her about that.
I'm sorry. I think I lost y'all for a second. Is that the backup date we chose last time?
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
Okay, then yeah. That works for me.
Go with that. Go back to work, woman.
All right, y'all. So nobody has receipts?
Not yet.
Okay.
Because everything I bought was on the card. It was just a little stuff, and I bought half from San Antonio and half from us for speaker gifts.
Awesome.
So
Okay.
we put the dinner on the card. The hotel rooms here were on the card. So the only thing that you would have are the speakers, because the speakers stipends, because the travel will be split 3 ways by Jean.
Okay. Perfect. I'll reach out to all the speakers. Just, I don't want them waiting on our payment. I want to be a fast payer.
Later.
Okay. Y'all have a good one.
You too,
You
Amy.
too. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay. So under new business, that electrical hazard training, I talked with Elmer and Hayden about an 8-hour training. They are very receptive to that. Bring out the ARC trailer, and we were looking at probably in the fall sometime. But I will talk to them and work with their schedules, but they are very open to it. Does anybody have any comments or concerns on that? No. What do you got, Greg? Welcome.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, now.
All right, perfect. I'm on my phone because I'm driving, so I didn't know if I was plugged in right.
Well, we met with Encore at the bilingual training. Thank you so much for your generous donation, guys.
Yeah.
Bartlett gave us $500. Yahoo!
Happy to do it.
Wonderful.
So we were talking with Encore, and we're going to do like 8 hours of electrical hazard training.
Nice.
Susan, do y'all have a location?
Do we what?
Do we have a location set for that training?
Nope,
Not yet.
not yet.
Because I can throw University Park. You know, I can throw that out if the indoor portion doesn't need to seat more than 50-ish people.
Well, I don't know. You know what I'll do is I'll talk to
I don't know how
Jean.
big or small it is.
Yeah, I understand. And I'll talk with Elmer about how many they feel comfortable with. And then we'll talk with Jean and see what he thinks the event will pull. How's that?
Perfect.
But we appreciate that. Okay, so we'll work on that. And then the bilingual workshop, everybody worked together so well. The location was perfect.
Yeah.
The agenda, Chris did a fabulous job. He put Dustin in a stretcher. He used the same stretcher that they took what's her name off the slopes at the Olympics. Oh, I can't. Lindsey Vaughn.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
He used the same stretcher and used Dustin brought his 2 young daughters, 11 and 20, and he used the 11-year-old in San Antonio for his Stop the Bleed demonstration. He has all these broken parts that he puts on for tourniquets and stuff. It was really very interactive. It was well received. And Lalo covered ground at all sites. Everybody loved that. It was a new dimension. And Dustin did a great job. Chris did a great job. And our interpreters were wonderful. So the AV by Mr. Levy was wonderful. Registration went well. We had like 73.
75 from what I remember from Gene saying. It was we're at 75.
75. And the Amy's staff was great. With volunteers, the staff at the Plano Center are awesome too. And our sponsors and vendors, Plano Power set up in the room, and I think that was like a 50-inch saw or something they brought and set up in the room. It was very
big.
attractive to the guys.
Yeah.
Lunch went well. We talked about budget, speaker travel arrangements. We have to say thank you to Mr. Sills for driving over 700 miles in 3 or 4 days.
That's amazing.
So, and next we want you to mark your calendars for February 9th, the 11th, and probably the 13th in San Antonio. And our speakers will be Michael Castle and Axel Avila. And both of them are international climbing champions. Well, actually, Avila just won the throw rope championship in New Zealand. So, and Mark is a former champion. Greg, you know anything about him?
I've never heard the name. No.
Well, he's a good climber. You'll like him. That was some really good training. So, any other comments on that? Anything y'all would like to see in that training? Let us know.
I thought it was a really great event, though. Everything, I mean, speakers, and I mean, I think all of our participants there really enjoyed it. From what I heard, a lot of folks came up to me and said they really enjoyed it.
And there were a lot of questions.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's move on to our certified arborist training. And that's March 11th, 12th, and 13th, the city of Dallas, Parks and Rec Division building. And I don't have the address for that, but it's on our website. And I was going to reach out to Preston because I believe they still need a couple of trainers.
No, we're all good on instructors.
There you are, Preston. I didn't see you. Well, how can we help?
We don't really need anything. We just kind of keep it all internal.
Okay. Well, we were going to change our board retreat because I didn't realize we'd scheduled it for the 13th. So we've changed it to the 27th.
Okay.
That's on down the agenda. How you doing?
Good. I'm at the North Texas Urban Forestry Conference. I saw Amy earlier.
Oh, sweet. I hope they have a good turnout.
Yeah, it was as many emails as I saw Gene sent out. I was afraid the registration was low, but they got full house.
Good. Okay, well, let us know if you need anything.
Yeah, thanks.
No, thank you. That's much needed. How many people y'all have registered?
30, and then I think we're getting a couple more parks employees coming.
Sweet. So is it mostly internal or you have a lot of outside?
It's a good mix of other municipalities, private arborists, and utility arborists.
Sweet.
Right.
Well, you ought to tell them about that next training we've got coming up because it's really good stuff with Ron Zillman. We'll talk about that in a minute. Have you know anything about him or Legacy Trees?
No.
Oh man, we'll talk about that. Well, anyway, thanks for that training. It's much needed in this area.
Yeah, thanks. Our job.
Amen. On Shade Keeper training, we held that in Grand Prairie on February 7th, the fruit tree pruning. Mr. Jim came out, and I've never seen peach trees that big, but we did our damage and left. And now they've lost their Keep Grand Prairie Beautiful coordinator. She's gone to the city of Fort Worth as their Keep Fort Worth Beautiful. They don't call them a coordinator anymore. They're like an educator. And we'll add additional training areas as needed, as requested. Just reach out and we can tailor that training just about anything. Chainsaw safety, how to plant, how to prune, whatever. We're here to help. Okay, well, saluting branches. We already have a date, September 16th. We just need to go. We know we're going to go to DFW. I've talked to Jim Casey with Rainbow, and his mom's out there. His dad will be buried out there, and he has a personal interest in taking care of that site. So they needed a site leader, and he has a gentleman he's working with in Fort Worth on that. So, Preston, do you know anything about a Dallas site, maybe?
I don't. I'll check with the parks guys.
Okay, that'd be great.
I think because they were talking about the Dallas VA.
Yeah, if we could get in there, that's right next to that Veterans Park we did last year. And that they have a huge parking lot. We don't even have to be up around the buildings. They have so many trees that need our assistance. So that's, what we were looking at, if we could get in there. Now I'll reach out to Saluting Branches and see if that's okay with them. They might have an in.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll do that. Thank you. Well, you're next, Preston. You want to talk about EAB?
I don't really have anything now. We're going to be doing some more kind of a renewed outreach campaign this spring, trying to get the word back out there because I think a lot of people never heard about it or forgot about it because it's just not on top of mind for them.
You're right. Well, let us know. We'll definitely get it up on the website.
Yeah, and then because we're looking at ways to help people at least replace, but still trying to figure out a way to help people remove trees on private property.
That's got to be an interesting battle to tackle.
Yeah, we can use our reforestation fund for new trees on private property to replace ash trees, but the limiting factor is people on fixed income got to have a $2,000 removal.
Yeah. Well, keep picking away at it because you've already made so many, steps forward.
Yeah. And we'll be doing some more. I need to coordinate with the Forest Service. We'll be doing some more trapping.
Excellent. Well, all you do is just baby steps all the way. Keep pushing.
And eventually, we're looking at doing some removal and replacement plantings in the Trinity forest with little saplings. So that might be a volunteer opportunity in the fall.
Well, let us know.
Yeah, I'll keep you all on the loop.
Okay.
But yeah, that's about all I got.
I appreciate it. Thanks for showing up. Mary, do you have anything you want to share before you go?
She's still on the phone, Susan.
She's already gone?
No, well, she's on, but she's on a phone call. And she's
okay.
So yeah, she's still.
Well, where were we?
Oh, I think it was my
your web update, Michael.
Yeah, sure. Well, good afternoon, everyone. And we've had right now. I've been working on finishing up the bilingual final posts and everything for that, and also kind of turning our attention to Urban Forestry Institute. I've got flyers and things ready to go for that. Once we get registration open, I will have a link. I'll put the QR code link on the flyer and get that out to everybody. I think that worked out really well for the bilingual as well. So I'll have everything ready to go on that here real soon. All of our 2027 items for the for the bilingual safety workshop for 2027. That information is now up on the web for folks to get to mark their calendars and dates. So we have a page ready to go for that. Once we start having new updates coming through, I'll update accordingly on the website. And then the final thing is that I've been right now, we got to debut our new financial platform called Zeffy.com, and it really worked out well for our bilingual safety workshop. Now, one of the things that we also have a lot of capabilities as well with the software to do also email campaigns, as well as we may eventually be moving our newsletter to that too, because we can take in a lot more subscribers on that versus where we're at with MailChimp. So still weighing some of the options on that first, but it looks like that's probably what we're going to do. Probably by the later part of summer, I probably will be able to have a pretty good idea if that's what we want to do. So I'm working on that part right now, and then we're having a couple little things with we had set up our bank account through there. We're working right now to make sure there was a little bit of an error with the transmission Monday, so we're working on making it with Zeffy.com to make sure everything goes through on our next ACH that'll happen next Monday. So I'll keep everybody posted on how we did, but everything has been so far really, really convenient and easy for us to do our door prizes as well as taking in donations. And I think it's going to make things a lot easier for TBUFC altogether. So I think a pretty big thing for us as an organization, and it's going to give us a lot more options to do some cool things down the road. But couldn't be more.
It worked great on the raffle, Michael.
Yeah,
Jim, how did that go for you? He sold all the tickets.
Yeah, exactly.
You didn't have any problems, did you, Jim?
No, I did not. Did make one or two sales on that after we got it set up. But I think if we set that up earlier or at the beginning of the event next year, we'll probably have more bites that way.
Yeah, I think so too. I think it's going to really be nice for us at the events, because we do have the ability to do tap to pay on our phones that tie directly to the account, and everything directly goes to TBUFC and to our bank account. So it's really going to be convenient for doing on-site sales, there at the event. But I think the platform's a win-win. There's no cost to it for us. I mean, it really, everything's donations through Zeffy.com, and Zeffy.com is made directly for nonprofits. And so the platform does have event ticketing, and also has the email campaigns, as well as and also the financial side of it, where you can sell tickets and do auctions, as well as anything with, and then also take in just regular event sales. So there's a lot of things you can do, but I think it's a perfect win for TBFC, and also competes with just about any other registration platform out there. So I think we've done really well with that. And again, I think look forward to when we get to our UFI event in May, we'll get another stab at getting to see the capabilities of it. But really, we're excited. It's exciting times, and we'll just continue on building it out. Other than that, that's about all I've got for this one. And Susan, I guess that's about it. I'll turn it back to you.
Well, you did a great job on all that media stuff that I threw at you at the last minute. And I mean, the night before we was putting slides together. And I just wanted to do a little bit more on the money from bilingual. We took in $440 at the raffle. We had a $1,000 donation from Encore. We had a $250 sponsorship from Plano Power. Plus, on site, he gave us a little handheld motor chainsaw, a little 4-inch chainsaw. And Bartlett's, Mr. Massagill's group gave us $500. So that's pretty good stuff on the bilingual.
Yes.
Plus 75 participants. Okay, so next, did we lose Mary?
She's still
Still on
on.
call?
But
Well, then we'll go on to the Urban Forestry Institute. And we already have dates and speakers confirmed. And we'll be covering stop the malpractice as part of it, but there'll be a half a day inside with everything from biology to pruning and how to write specs, etc., and then go outside and spend a half a day learning how to apply that prescription. You want to put that agenda up real quick for me, Mike?
Yeah, just a second here. Let's see, I just have it here. One second here.
Anyway, we have Dallas May 5th and then San Antonio May 7th. And so Ron Zilmer, if you can, he's got over 30 years in this industry. And you can see he's got an undergraduate degree in urban forestry, a master's degree in tree physiology, youngest president elected to the Wisconsin Arborist Association, served the International Society Certified Arborist Certification Board. You can read all that. The man has a resume that'll choke a horse, but he also grows trees from the roots up in a system. He's even developed, it's just getting his patent, and we are the first people out of the box that he's been speaking. He hadn't spoken in 4 or 5 years because he's been trying to get this patent. And when Chris Rasmussen went to his location, he had to sign a non-disclosure statement and not take any pictures. And he doesn't plant in containers. He plants in the ground in squares, and it has like a netting around the edge. And he's developed a whole system. It's like a forklift with a plate on the front that picks this big ball up and sets it down. And he's also developed an excavator that goes in and excavates, breaks the ground up to put this ball in. But he is very adamant. He's very energetic. He says there's no reason why a municipal arborist should walk up to a tree and have to spend 5 or 10 minutes trying to decide how to prune that tree. This should be just an automatic, because a prescription should be anyway. You'll love him. He's very energetic. So they'll be talking about developing the prescription from the roots up and applying it, how to grow trees. I'm excited. So that'll be May 5th here and May 7th in San Antonio. And we have already booked Texas Agri-Life Center, and they will be at the Landa Recreation Center in New Braunfels. So that's May 5th and 7th. We need your help. Get the word out. And then
what's the times?
Huh?
What time?
Oh, we'll start at 8.
Okay.
8 to 4. Any other questions on that, guys? Okay. Speakers Bureau. I can always use assistance in putting all the articles and stuff that we have up into some kind of order. But let's back up. Mary's off the phone. Miss Mary, are you available to give us an update on our social media?
Yes, I really apologize, y'all, for all the chaos. I feel like I've been going.
That you have to work?
Oh no, I usually turn the phone off, but I didn't this time. Social media is going well. I now post at least once a week, if not twice a week, on if y'all send me pictures. If I don't have pictures, I make a post where I grab information from the website. I usually try to post the monthly meetings the week of, just for the community to know. We've got a little bit better traction, seeing as how the posting is becoming more scheduled and consistent. But outside of that, on LinkedIn, I know me and Mike are trying to make that work. And so far, I've not been able to access the LinkedIn account for Trinity Blackland, because LinkedIn's a little different than Facebook. It's not letting us claim that the account as a business account. But again, I'm not all social media savvy, but I do make social media posts on LinkedIn for Trinity on my LinkedIn account. So those are getting good traction, actually better traction than Facebook gets. But outside of that, I enjoy the pictures y'all send because I miss the events and I love posting them and watching the interaction. So send me whatever y'all get and I'll keep posting.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Mary.
Have you heard from Dustin yet, Michael?
Mm-mm.
Has he sent you any pictures that support?
No, not yet. Not from Dustin.
Okay, I'll reach out and get pics. Okay. So y'all, if you have any articles or videos, be sure and send them to Mike and he'll get those posted. I don't see anyone from, I'm moving on to Texas Tree Trails update. I don't see Mr. Hauser with us.
No, he's not on.
We're just clicking along as usual. They're working on the website, I believe. And then the next on the agenda is that's supposed to be the Texas Urban Forestry Council. Mark's our representative, and we don't know when the next meeting is, but we'll let you know. They only meet twice a year, and they just met. And then we're going to move on to the board retreat, and we had it scheduled for March 13th, but we're going to change that to the 27th because that's the last date of that certified arborist training in Dallas. Everybody get that?
Yes.
Sounds good.
Yay. So since that's our next meeting would have been on the 26th, we're just going to change our next regularly scheduled board meeting to the 27th and knock it all out at once. Does that sound okay?
Yeah.
Good for me.
What time for the retreat?
Yeah.
What time is the retreat, Susan?
Oh, what time? We'll start about 10 o'clock.
Where is Amy's Lake House?
We'll send you and I don't know right off. It's in Athens.
Okay, love it.
Yeah, it's much closer to you, honey. But we'll forward that to you. So we're going to change our next meeting date to March 27th and do that via Zoom. How's that? Does anybody have anything they'd like to add to the agenda or cover or say? Hello?
This is a personal thing, but I'm starting the arborist exam prep tonight. It's a 10-week course with some organization in Austin, Texas. They partner with Texas A&M Forestry. They're called Arboraholic. And I had to default to that option because I was actually registered with Dallas with Preston for the upcoming courses, but I am working on a pretty big award application for Keeping Us Beautiful, and the application is actually due those dates that the arborist course is in Dallas, so I had to back out and choose this as my default. It is 10 weeks, but I hope to take the test come May. That's my goal.
Oh, that's great.
So,
congratulations.
Thank you. I'm excited. I was studying last night, and boy, I tell you what, I could read about trees nonstop without getting tired.
Well, the thing about it is that you don't know enough to hurt yourself. Just go by what's in the book.
I am so new to all of this, but I look forward to the learning process and doing what I can where I can with what skills I bring. So thank y'all for letting me be a part of all of this.
No, thank you for joining this madness.
Oh, I love it.
I know. Michael joined, and he's from the rec group. Mm-hmm. And he's like, oh, y'all are just so much different. And Mark just went to boating, went to traps, and he came back and he goes, we're so much different. I went, I know. I played both games.
Yep.
But anyway, thank you, Miss Mary. And it was a wonderful event. Everybody worked so hard, even if you weren't there. We just appreciate everybody's assistance in making this thing grow. TBUFC is branching out, and it's all because of y'all. I appreciate it. Anything else?
I don't think
well,
so.
I guess I'm going to see y'all on the 27th.
Want to make a motion to close the meeting?
Yes, sir.
A second.
All right.
Right.
Well, we're adjourned, guys.
Okay, y'all have a good rest of your